Take your Bibles tonight and turn to Revelation chapter 21, and we're going to be spending our time in this text for the next few moments this evening. Once again, that is Revelation chapter 21, and we're going to begin our study at verse number 4 in just a few moments. It is so good to be back with you tonight, to be a part of this week's gospel meeting here at Morrison. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here with you this week. It has been a beautiful day. Have enjoyed it very, very much, being able to catch up with several folks this week, people that we have known from the past, and always look forward to coming back and seeing so many of those familiar faces. And there are some things that really, when you think about it, make you feel really old. You ever thought about that before? When certain things happen or when you see certain people? One of the blessings of my life when we preached here, worked here in McMinnville, was teaching over at Boyd Christian. And it was so good to see John Davis on Sunday. He was one of my students there. It was also good to see Marissa, and I knew her as Hillis as well. And now to see her married and having a family of her own, and then also to see Justin tonight and meeting his wife and seeing how he has grown through the years. Justin was in, I think, his early years of high school. And may have been about a junior in high school when we left McMinnville. But Justin really was a model student. Justin was one who was always very conscientious of everything that he did as far as his education was concerned. But it is so good to see his growth that he continues to do. Appreciate that prayer tonight. And whenever I come back to McMinnville, one of the ways that I kind of connect with Justin is turn on the radio. And I can hear him there and love, most of the time I want to hear the music playing, but I actually enjoy hearing Justin talk for a little bit because it gives me a sense of being able to connect with him once again. But so good to see some of these students that have grown up and building the families of their own today. It's been great to talk with the Stubblefields and to be able to talk with them about their sons. Wasn't able to have their youngest son in class, but Cole not only was not only a student of mine, he also was a ball player of mine, and he was a model student too. And so that says something about their parents that they have. But appreciate these young people so very much. Appreciate their families, the good stock from which they come. I also want to say tonight how thankful I am for the hospitality that has been shown this week so far. I really enjoyed being with Mark and Teresa on Sunday, getting to go over to their house, be with Chigger and Diane last night to go to Prater's. And just something quirky about me, I guess, at least Chris thinks it's quirky, but one of my favorite restaurants in all of Warren County is Prater's. And so when I found out that we were going there last night, it brought a smile to my face. But I don't particularly like Prater's specifically for the barbecue. I love their chicken tenders. I think they have some of the greatest chicken tenders known to man. In fact, probably the best chicken tenders that I have ever had. Now, Chris, he kind of rolls his eyes at me when I talk about them. I think he thinks he's got the idea that one chicken tender is as good as another, or once you've had one, you've had them all. But to me, I'll stop there 2 or 3, maybe even 4 or 5 times while I'm in town and load up on them and get my fill for the next time to go back. But I really enjoyed that last night, and then to be able to spend time with the McAfees tonight over at Cracker Barrel and to share some stories about some mission trips that we've taken and some interaction there. Those are things that preachers love to talk about and discuss. By a show of hands, how many of you have ever seen the previews to a movie and you thought to yourself, I just can't wait for that movie to come out to the movie theater? You ever had that happen before? Anybody? in here? Okay, there's a few hands that went up. All right. Let me ask you this. How many of you have ever maybe heard from a family member or some friends about a place that they had gone to, and when they came back and they described to you just how beautiful this place was and all of the things that they were able to do, you thought to yourself, I want to go there as well. Anybody in here done that before? Or maybe you have seen some pictures on TV. Maybe you've been flipping through a magazine at the doctor's office and there were some pictures there, maybe even a write-up. But maybe there were some other things that you were able to see and to hear about, and you thought to yourself, I've got to go to that place sometime. You know, there are some places that Blair and I and our children would love to go to and visit. One of those places is the Grand Canyon. We want to take a trip out west sometime. And that's one of those beautiful sights that we really want to be able to see and to be able to take in the beauty that's there. We've heard people talk about it. We've seen the pictures. My children, they want to go to this place called Disney World. Can't imagine why, but we took our kids there several years ago now. I guess it was about 5 years ago when they were very, very little. And as soon as we finished that trip, guess what they were saying? Daddy, when can we go back? Well, it took about 5 years for us to save up, if you can imagine that for just a moment. But it took about 5 years to save up for the next trip. And this time Blair said that there's some special things that I want to do now that they're older. We're going to set up with a travel agent and we're going to work some things out so that we can stay on property. And she had all of these things worked out. And so 5 years later, we were able to go back. And as soon as we finished with the trip, guess what they were saying? Daddy, when can we go back there again? Blair and I, we want to go to Hawaii sometime together. And our next big anniversary, that's what the plan is to go there. And so last night we were sitting at the dinner table with Chigger and Diane, and they were talking about their next trip that they were going to be taking to Hawaii. Well, my antennas immediately started to go off. I wanted to know more. Tell me about the places to go. Tell me about the places to visit. I can't wait to go. There are so many other places that we could put down on a list of things that I would like to see, places that I would like to enjoy. But did you know that there is a place that we read about in the Word of God that every single person wants to see, and every single person wants to go there when this life is over, and that is the place called heaven. You see, when we open our Bibles to Revelation chapter 21, John is going to paint several strokes for us about how wonderful this place is. And when we go down and we read through this text, it should cause us to have a great desire to want to go there more than anything. This week we have been looking at some eternal truths that are designed to motivate us to remain faithful. Sunday morning Bible class, we talked about the importance of remaining committed, remaining faithful to our personal Bible study. Sunday morning worship, we looked at 5 basic Bible truths to motivate us to stay faithful to the Lord. Sunday afternoon, we talked about the great love of God from the book of 1 John. And if ever there was a subject to motivate us to remain faithful, that's a subject there. But last night we studied about the cross. If ever there was another subject to motivate us to stay committed to the Lord, the cross is it. But tonight, I want to submit to you a third subject in this line of thinking that should motivate us and really serve as a great motivation to be faithful. And that is the place called heaven. Tonight I get to preach my favorite sermon of all sermons. Sunday morning, I told you that if I had one last sermon to preach, it would be what we talked about Sunday morning. But tonight I get to preach my favorite one because it's about my favorite place. a place that I long to go to more than any other, and I hope that you do as well. When we look at Revelation 21, what does John teach us about heaven? Number one, he's going to show to us some things that are barred from heaven. When you look at Revelation 21, beginning at verse number 4, the Bible records this, "And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. And there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away." Now I want us to focus on this passage for the next few moments. And I want you to notice the very first sentence that he uses here. He says, "God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes." And then he's going to talk to us about four things that bring tears to our eyes more than anything else upon this earth. But before we get to those four things, I want you to look at a phrase that he uses. He says, "And there shall be no more." Generally speaking, whenever we hear that phrase, "no more," it's used in a negative sense, isn't it? We generally don't use that in a positive way. For example, recently, I think it was last week, there was somebody that gave our boys a bag of gummy bears. So when they got home, guess what they wanted? They wanted those gummy bears. They opened that big bag up and immediately they started eating them. And after just a few moments, guess what I told them? It's time to put the bag away. They weren't ready to hear those words. And so I had to remind them, no more. It's time to stop. Think about a father that may have to come in and may have to tell his wife or may have to tell his kids, "I'm sorry, there is no more money." Or what about this? The dreaded words that doctors sometimes tell families. "I'm sorry, there's no more hope. There's nothing more that we can do for your loved one." You see, generally speaking, when we use that phrase in our language, it's always got some negative that goes with it. But when we open our Bibles here to Revelation chapter 21, it's got some positive things that are going to go with it. He says, "And there shall be no more death." Perhaps he lists this one first because I can't think of a subject that causes people to shed more tears than the subject of death. But you know what he tells us about heaven? He says that there's not going to be any more tearful goodbyes in those hospital rooms. There's not going to be any more tearful goodbyes at the graveside, at the funeral homes. You're not going to have to say goodbye to a loved one ever again in heaven because there's not going to be any more death. He goes on and he says, "Nor sorrow, nor crying." Now I like to tie both of these together and I like to think about it this way. There's no more battles to be fought. No more burdens to bear. But then look at the fourth one here. It says no more pain. Don't raise your hand on this one. But how many in here struggle with pain? Maybe you struggle with chronic physical pain. Last night we talked about Jesus and the physical pain and the emotional pain that went along with the cross. You may be struggling in here tonight with some chronic pain. And when you hear that word pain, you know what that's all about. Several years ago now, when we first moved to South Haven, I was introduced to a man by the name of Larry Davis. This is Karen's cousin, uncle, something. She's related to Larry in some way. Now, when she mentions Larry's name, she gives the nickname that he had, and for the life of me, I never knew him that way, and so I can't even recall what that nickname is. But we always called him Larry. And the first time that Larry walked up to me, he stuck out his hand to shake my hand. And the very first thing that I knew about this man is that he is strong. Because when he shook my hand, it was one of those handshakes where you felt like you were about to be put on your knees. Okay? This man's hands were big. There were calluses all over, very, very rough. But I also noticed something else about him. When he walked, he was already kind of slumped over. His back, he couldn't stand up straight. When he would walk, he had this limp to him. And he was only in, I think, his late 50s, maybe early 60s at that time. For about 30 years, maybe pushing 40 years, this man had been involved in hard manual labor all of his life. He built fences for a living. And day in and day out, he would use those tools working and doing that hard manual labor, building those fences. And after a while, his body just couldn't take it anymore. But in the 1990s, he had both of his knees replaced. Less than 20 years later, he had to have the replacements replaced. He'd had both hips replaced. He had had numerous back surgeries, and even before then, when he was in the Vietnam War, he was shot and the bullet was still lodged in his body. Okay? The doctor said it was best that they didn't remove it. You think this guy knows a lot about pain? Absolutely. Every time that I would see him at worship, he'd come in, he'd sit down, and he'd be grimacing in pain. Always had to sit very gingerly. He would sit in his seat for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then Larry would get up. He would walk out very quietly out to the foyer, and he'd stretch his legs, and he'd sit on one of the pews out in the foyer. He'd be there for 15, 20 minutes or so. He'd get back up again, he'd stretch his legs, and he'd make his way back into the auditorium, and he'd come back and sit by Miss Linda. But over time, Larry got to where he spent a lot of time in and out of the hospital. I learned a lot about infections with Larry because when you have a lot of artificial parts in your body, you tend to be more prone to getting staph infection. And Larry lived with a lot of staph infections so much that they had to put these antibiotic blocks around those different replacement parts. And every so often through the years, he'd have to go to the hospital for about a week and have antibiotics directly shot into those various ports where those blocks were. Now, I said all of that to say this. That man knows all about pain. Do you think that he was looking forward to a place, and I'm using him in past tense, and I'm going to tell you why in just a minute. Do you think that he was looking forward to a time where he experienced pain no more? Absolutely. Because for decades, this is all he has ever known. 2 years ago, Larry was out fishing in a lake in northeast Mississippi, doing something that he loved, and he stood up in the boat. Two things may have happened to him. Number one, he could have had some type of cardiac episode, and when he tried to step up, he flipped out of the boat. Or when he tried to get up, he lost his balance and he flipped out of the boat. He was about the size of a football field, 100 yards out in the water, and Larry drowned. But that man is one that I know of that knew all about pain and longed for the day when his pain was going to be taken away. That there are those in here that are dealing with emotional pain. You're dealing with things that nobody else may know about. Maybe you've had a spouse who's died, a child who's died, a parent, a very, very close friend, and you're struggling with that loss. Maybe it's the case that you've had a loved one who's gone astray And that's really caused some emotional pain in your life. Did you know that when we look at Revelation chapter 21, that God's going to take all that pain away? We're not going to experience that pain anymore. I want you to think about this for just a moment. What if there was an island that we could go to here on this earth that had at least one of these things that we've talked about so far? You know what I think we would do? I think we would sell everything that we've got in order to go to that place so that we don't have to experience these things anymore. But here's the thing. We can experience all of those things, but it's not going to be here. It's going to be in heaven. And so number one, when we look at Revelation chapter 21, John is going to share with us some things that are barred from heaven. But then number two, he's going to share with us those who are blessed to enter heaven. Let's drop down to verse number 7 for just a moment. John writes this, he says, "He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son." Do you see that word overcometh there? 7 times earlier in this book, with the 7 churches of Asia, Jesus would use this particular word. And when we think about that idea of overcoming, it's the idea of overcoming sin, overcoming the ways of this world. And it's just not a one-time overcoming. When you see the ETH there in the King James, it's a continual action. It's something that we're striving to do on a regular, on a daily basis. Overcoming all of these things, the things that the devil is trying to do in order to cause us to go astray. But look at what he says. He says, "He that overcometh shall inherit all things." That word inherit is a word that means to receive. That there are some that are in here this evening that have been blessed by receiving an inheritance. Maybe you have received some money. Maybe you have received jewelry or some land or some other family heirlooms. And you cherish those things, don't you? But the reason why you have those is because of your connection with the one who passed. Do you know why we're able to have this inheritance? It's because of our connection with the Lord. And it's there that we can be part of the family. You remember when we studied on Sunday afternoon about the great love of God? One of the things that He extends to us about His great love is that we can be part of His family. We can have family status. And as having a family status, He's got an inheritance ready for us to receive. When you look at 1 Peter chapter 1, verse number 4, he says, "To an inheritance, incorruptible, undefiled, fadeth not away, reserved in heaven for you." But I want you to consider something with me for just a moment. When you look at Revelation 21 and verse number 7, you know what else John is telling us? Not everyone's going to get to go there. Not everyone is going to be blessed to enter in. You see, there are some requirements that must be met in order for us to go to heaven. Several years ago now, we had one of our members at South Haven decided to go to the Memphis School of Preaching. And this brother, he had an Islamic background. He moved over here from, I don't even remember exactly where he moved from. It was a place, I believe, in West Africa. And he's gone back there to do mission work now. But he moved to the United States a number of years ago. And he was converted out of Islam. And he said, "Here's one of the things that I have noticed about the United States. Everybody goes to heaven if you die in America." Everybody goes to heaven. He said whenever somebody dies and the speaker gets up at the funeral, all they do is preach them into heaven. Everybody gets to go to heaven if you die in the U.S. He said, we don't talk about those kind of things in my country. If you die, and if you die lost. But isn't that how we kind of look at it in this country? Even if you're not a religious person, you're an American and you die, you're going to heaven. That's not what this book has to say. There are some requirements that must be met. Let's think about it this way. You know, when we think about COVID and all of the ways that our world has changed over the past year, that there are some places of business especially that have put some requirements out there on the front door. One of those things may be, in order for you to enter into this establishment, you're going to have to wear a mask. And if you don't wear one, you cannot enter. See, that's a requirement. Years ago, convenience stores, what was their requirement that they started asking everybody to do? What did the sign say? No shirt, no shoes, no what? No service. There's some requirements. You've got to meet certain stipulations to go in. You think about places of business and you see the pictures on the bathrooms, at least this is the way that it's supposed to be, that you've got men going into one, you've got women going into the other, and one authorizes one authorizes the other, and if you're not on that picture, you're not supposed to go in there. That's supposed to be understood, at least an understood rule in our country. Or maybe you've seen something like this, authorized personnel only. Now what if I'm not authorized personnel? I don't get to go in because I haven't met the requirements. Several years ago, I received a phone call at the church building. One of our members was in the intensive care unit at Baptist DeSoto Hospital, our local hospital that we have at South Haven. And I immediately got off the phone and went to the hospital. They weren't doing well. But it just so happened that I was driving my wife's van that day. She had my truck. And I walk in the hospital, I get on the elevator, and this hospital, it's one of the high rises, and I think it's got about 14 floors, and go to get in, and I hit the button for the number 4, intensive care unit. Get off, go to the desk. I asked the lady, I said, can I go see so-and-so? She said, sir, visiting hours are at such and such time. I said, ma'am, I understand that, but I'm their preacher. You know what she looked at me and she said? Where's your badge? You see, at Baptist DeSoto Hospital, you have to wear this thing that they give you called a clergy badge. And I said, ma'am, I said, I don't have it with me. My wife and I swapped cars. Normally mine is in the console of my truck, and that's where it's at today. I've got her van. And I just received this phone call at the office. I really would like to go back and have a prayer with the family. You know what she told me? No badge, no entrance. Very short, very firm, no badge, no entrance. And I said, ma'am, I said, would you mind calling down to the security office? They've got all of my credentials there. Here's my driver's license, or better yet, look at our website. She had a computer right there. Look at our website. You'll see my picture there on the website. She just looked at me and she said, sir, I'm not doing any of those things. No badge, no entrance. Okay? I was starting to get the hint a little bit. I'm not going in today. Just so happened there was a lady getting off the elevator. She walked over and she said, what's going on? And the lady told her, she said, well, this man wants to go back and see so-and-so, and he claims to be a preacher, but he doesn't have his badge, so he's not allowed back. And she said, I know him. He's here on a regular basis. Please let him go back. I was thankful that that lady walked through that day, because otherwise I was not going to get to go back. And somebody might be asking, why would they give you such a hard time? Well, in some places, there are some people that have started taking advantage of the preacher word, And so if you go to the ICU desk and you tell them that you're a preacher, that's the code word, well, you can let me back there now. I don't have to wait to the visiting hours. And so there are people that have abused that, and so the way that this particular hospital gets around that is they give you a badge, and they ask you to wear that. And generally speaking, when you go into that hospital, if you're wearing that badge, you can go anywhere in that hospital that you want. No questions asked. But if you don't have it, authorized personnel only, if you will. Now imagine for just a moment that heaven is right through door number 6 over here to my right, to your left. John tells us there's some credentials we've got to meet to go through that door. He says, he that overcometh all things, or that overcometh shall inherit all things, shall be able to receive. I've got something that I've got to do to go through those doors. You've got something you've got to do to go through those doors, because not everyone can enter. And so when we think about heaven, John tells us that there are some things that are barred. John tells us that there are those that are blessed to enter in. But he also tells us that there are those that are banned from heaven. Look back here at verse number 8. The very next verse, he says, but the fearful and the unbelievers and the abominable, the murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. And we're going to be referencing this verse some tomorrow night in our study. But I want you very quickly just to notice a few things. Some of these may seem out of place with others, but look at the word fearful there. Those that are afraid to commit to Christ. And we'll talk a little bit more about that fear tomorrow night. He talks about unbelievers, those who are atheists, abominable, those that are doing things that God detests, murderers, those that are taking the lives of other people, of innocent people. He uses the word whoremongers here, those that are sexually impure, and sorcerers and idolaters. They're giving themselves, their lives to other gods. And all liars, those that continually practice lying, they're not going to be able to go to heaven. He says these individuals are going to be banned. When you look at 1 Corinthians 6, verses 9 and 10, he talks about those that were working unrighteousness. They can't go in. You look at Galatians 5, 19 through 21, he gives a list of the works of the flesh. What's the result there? Can't go to heaven. Heaven's not going to be the home of these individuals. But drop down to Revelation 21, verse number 27. He says, and there shall in no wise no unclean enter into anything that defileth, neither whatsoever worketh abomination or maketh a lie, but they which are written in the Lamb's book of life. A couple of things to consider here. Nothing unclean is going into heaven. When you look back at verse number 8, and you look through some of those things, imagine with me for just a moment that you put out an ad. Let's just say for example's sake that you put it out in the newspaper, or maybe you put it on the radio or somewhere online. And here's the ad that you put out. You're wanting to have a roommate. You've got a room available at your house. You're going to charge $500 a month rent for that room, and it's available first come, first serve. First person to reply, no questions asked. You get it. The first person that comes to you, you tell them welcome. They move in, and afterwards you find out this person has been guilty of murder, or this person is constantly guilty of sexual immorality, and they want to be involved in that immorality at your house. This is an individual that's always doing things that God detests. Maybe you've got someone that's there that is a sexual predator. Would you feel very comfortable going to sleep at night? You know what John tells us? He says we don't have to worry about those kind of things. The people that practice those things in heaven. Why? Because those individuals are going to be banned. But then number 4, we read about the beauty of heaven. Let's drop back to verse number 2. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Did you notice the picture that he's painting about heaven? He said it's a bride adorned, a bride prepared for her husband. The old saying is that heaven is a prepared place for who? For a prepared people. When you think about a bride on her wedding day, did you know that she's been preparing for that day many times long before that day ever gets there? For the guys, what do we tell her? Honey, just tell me when to show up. I'll be there at 2 o'clock if that's when I'm supposed to be there to say I do. And you take care of everything else. You do what you want to. That's the way we do it as guys, don't we? But oftentimes for the bride, she's been thinking about her wedding day since she was a little girl. And she's been thinking about what her hair's going to look like that day, what her makeup's going to look like, what that dress is going to look like. And then when that wedding song, that march begins to be played and those doors at the back open and the preacher says, everyone rise, and we turn around and we look at the bride, all eyes are on her and her beauty. That's what heaven is going to be like. We're going to be focusing on the beauty of it. Now let's look down towards the end of Revelation chapter 21, and let's notice some of the descriptions that he gives here. And the building of the wall of it was of jasper, and the city was pure gold. Imagine going to a city that's pure gold, like unto clear glass. Verse number 19, the foundations of the wall of the city were garnished with all manner of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper. It's like a diamond. Then he says the second was sapphire. It's this clear blue color. The third, a chalcedony, similar to copper, and we know how valuable copper is today. The fourth, an emerald, a deep green color. But then drop down to verse number 23. The city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it, for the light of God did lighten it. It's going to be light all the time so that we can see that beauty continually. And then look at Revelation 22, verse number 1. He showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. You ever seen a river like that? You ever seen a river that was so clear, so beautiful, so pure? It's breathtaking, isn't it? To see something like that. The story is told about a little boy when he was 2 years old. He lost his eyesight. I can't imagine losing my eyesight, and that is things going black completely. If I take my glasses off, I'm, as the old saying goes, I'm blind as a bat. I can't see our song leader in the front row. He's nothing but a blur, okay? Don't even ask me about anything in the back right now. But if I put these back on, everything is crystal clear. I can see the numbers that are written on the back wall. Believe me, I can see that clock that's back there too and know what time it is. But I can't imagine everything being completely black. If you were to ask me which one of my 5 senses that I would like to lose the least if I had a choice, the one that would be at the bottom of the list would be my eyesight. Take anything else that you want, but please don't take my eyesight. Little boy, 2 years old, he goes completely blind. For years, his mother and father, They try everything that they can in order to have his eyesight returned to him. They see all of these specialists. They spend all kinds of money. They have all kinds of surgeries done. And year after year after year, to no avail. Finally, when he's 13, his daddy's doing some research one day. He hears about this doctor in Switzerland who's doing wonderful things and has dealt with people that have gone through this particular disease where it robbed this little boy's eyesight. And the daddy said, I think we found the guy. They raised the money. They went to Switzerland. Right before the procedure took place, the little boy asked his daddy, he said, Daddy, tell me what you see outside. He said, Son, I see these beautiful mountains. As far as the eye can see, snow covering them, birds flying. You should see the way that the sun glows off of that snow. Boy goes in for surgery. He has that surgery. When he comes out, the doctor takes the bandages off. Boy looks straight ahead. Tears begin to fall. The daddy's response was, oh no, it's happened again. Another surgery, another failure. He still can't see. You know what that boy said? Daddy, why didn't you tell me it was going to be this beautiful? You know what his father told him? He said, Son, he said, I didn't know how to adequately describe what I was seeing to somebody who was blind. He was using what we call accommodative language. When we look at Revelation chapter 21, God is using accommodative language. He's using language that you and I understand and have a grasp of in this life. But here's the bottom line that He's getting at. I want to give you a picture of just how beautiful that it is. And so He gives us the most beautiful things to which we can relate here on this earth, to give us a picture of just how wonderful heaven is going to be. But if we're going to go to heaven, you know what we've got to have? We've got to have a reservation. Tonight, have you made your reservation to go to this place? You will not get to go to heaven and be blessed to enter in if you have not made your reservation. The way that we make that reservation is by believing that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, repenting of our sins, making the great confession, and being baptized into Christ, Galatians 3 and verse number 27. But that's only the beginning. The Lord also requires of us, as one of those requirements, one of those stipulations, you be faithful unto death, Revelation 2 and verse number 10. Tonight, if you have not met the stipulations, if you haven't met the things found in this work in order to enter into heaven and be blessed to go to that wonderful place for all eternity, there is no better night than tonight to prepare yourself. I want to close with this thought, and that is, we need to remember that we can't live for the devil while we're here and expect to be with God for eternity. We've got to live for God while we're here so that we can be with Him there. But it all begins how we prepare ourselves with our time here on this earth. If you're subject to heaven's invitation tonight, whether it's in obedience to the gospel or coming back to the fold through repentance and prayer, 1 John 1 verses 6 through 9, won't you come forward as together we stand and as we sing.